Hey folks, how's it hangin'? Welcome back to what we're going to be calling the RimWorld Restart on Death series, formerly known as the Infinite Lives series. Previously, my friends, we had left off where this neo-ninja from space was coming to murder us, which is no bueno. We had rushed our defenses, but he was a master of stealth, meaning we could barely hit him with any of our bow and arrow shots. What little bit of damage we had done would do little to deter him from attacking us. The man was a damn artist with a shuriken. His stealthiness, the darkness, and the pouring rain made it damn near impossible for Laz to draw a bead on him. Thankfully though, we had a friendly caravan here to help us out, as they also hated the space mercenaries, giving us a clean kill. Really a shame that he ended up dying though, as I'd hoped to take him prisoner so that we could recruit him, but oh well. Probably best he died when he did though, because a few more hits from one of these Neo Shuriken and we would have lost some limbs. As you can see here, Laz damn near lost his left arm during the whole kerfuffle. With the threat behind us, Black Toad could finally finish up his extensive research into steam power. With this new technology under our belt, we would also be able to start on a new project, and we're going to begin researching lens cutting, which will unlock ruby lens, which are of course crucial for completing a clockwork exoskeleton suit. Now, as Laz was healing up from the battle, I noticed he got an infection in his left arm, but thanks to some Glitter World medicine that we actually ended up receiving as a gift last episode as well, he should be right as rain. We also finished up lens cutting, but we don't have any rubies to cut for the exoskeleton, so we're going to have to begin some strip mining operations. Now, when it comes to this steampunk tech, I always feel like we're one step ahead, but two steps behind, and this situation's no different, as even though we've researched the technology and we're going to find rubies in the very near future, we don't have a pawn that has the required crafting and artistic skill, because apparently you need both. But we'll eventually find someone, I'm sure. As we were mining under the mountain, we also found an ancient danger, but for the time being, I'm going to leave it alone. We also ended up finding a small vein of sapphire. Even though it can't replace ruby, it'll be useful later on for some other stuff. Then, as we were mining for our sweet jewels, we ended up receiving notification that we are now being raided by some cultists. Even worse, it would seem they plan on summoning some fleshy monsters to try and attack us, which I'm not excited about. To prevent this from happening, I decided to try and attack them preemptively. And at first, this was actually going quite well, as we easily tore through the cultists. Then one of them knocked down the rogue and we had to kill him. Laz would go on ahead to try and stop the ritual as Black Toad began tending to her wounds. Laz had finally arrived, but every damn shot he took with his laser rifle ended up missing until finally he shot them in the back. This did indeed end the ceremony, but the cultist was quite pissed and started whapping him on the head with their mighty club until knocking him to the ground. I began to think we might have to restart in the near future. However, lucky enough for me, we ended up killing the cultist, and Black Toad would go in and save the day by rescuing Laz as well as the rogue. We would also end up taking one of the cultists prisoner, and the hope was, of course, that we would be able to recruit him, but with a resistance this high, there's a much more likely chance we'll end up selling him. In the meantime, however, on the world map, I noticed a faction contention just outside the base, very close by. Essentially, some very valuable drop pods were falling from orbit, and some of the local factions were going to be fighting over them, and there was indeed going to be a threat there. So we began heading there, but upon our arrival, we realized that there were a lot, and I mean a lot, of very large mechanoids. Now, you know me, normally I like to roll the dice a little bit and try my hand at these types of things, like sneaking in and taking some of these items, but because a couple of days ago some cultists almost completely handed our asses to us, I decided not to tempt fate this time. The trip was not completely in vain though, because it really helped me realize on the world map that our closest, even neutral settlement that we could trade with was about a 5 days journey on foot. So we're gonna need to step it up and try to get some vehicles. Now, we do have some basic animal powered vehicles that we can currently build, but we're going to need some hay grass to go about attracting the horses that will pull the carriage. Oddly enough, it is currently winter time here, however, it is also warm enough for us to continue growing different types of crops like hay grass. Almost definitely because we're currently living in an active volcanic area. We would also end up having some visitors who were visiting the colony looking to do a bit of trading, and thus we would sell them some of our knives in exchange for some sake. Now, Laz here has lived many a life, and throughout each of those lives he has indeed enjoyed his alcoholic beverage or two. But by far, I think sake might just be his favorite. For a time, while we're waiting on our hay to grow, we would end up working on some new residential housing for whenever we begin recruiting more people, just as well as some more natural pathing to ensure proper mobility around the colony. Our construction efforts would be halted when we ended up having yet another raid from an enemy clan. Luckily, these are not the space pirates and or mercenaries, so their tech is pretty limited. Even so though, they outnumbered us and many of them were already on Muffalo back, so they had us at a stark disadvantage. Many of them tanking right through our spike traps coming right for us. We would attempt to escape them by hiding inside of our walls. Things were beginning to look a little bit grim. On a spur of the moment idea though, we decided to burst out our western side walls and begin firing at our enemies. When this didn't exactly have the desired effect, we decided to rush them with our katana, and this seemed to begin doing the trick. So much so that they actually began to flee our colony. With a victory under our belt, we would begin tending to one of the samurai who had attacked us by the name of Ori. Ori here was of particular interest to us not only because he was recruitable and we need the extra manpower, but also because he has some pretty close crafting and artistic skills to the ones that we need. Luckily, the enemy clan hadn't done too much damage to our base, simply lighting a fire or two and destroying our cannon, material things. Sometime later though, when our hay grass was finally big enough for us to harvest, we would quickly throw together a little makeshift hayloft, that way we could store it all in as well. And finally, now that we have hay, we'll be able to utilize that hay to attract some ox, that way we can make our very own ox cart. Now, in terms of a personal vehicle, I do much rather prefer a covered carriage, but the ox cart would be perfect for traveling and trading. And that is exactly what we plan on using it for right now. This will reduce our travel time to any nearby friendly factions for trading to a mere fraction of what they were. We headed north to do some trading with a friendly clan. On one hand, we really wanted to make some silver and also see if they have any exotic items that we could purchase from them, but we also wanted to increase our relations with them. It might be nice to have some allies on this world. Laz and the Ox would begin their journey all the way back home, but in the meantime, we were working on our defenses and improving them furthermore. I wanted to add in some more spike traps as well as some large wooden barricades that would force them to walk through the spike traps. I would also move our cannon back to a more suitable position. It was also during this time that we had finally recruited Ori into our clan, which was nice. Now that he was finally one of us, we would help him increase that crafting skill immediately. We began making a stone cutting building. Now, stone cutting itself actually won't increase the crafting skill, but it does give us stone blocks which we can utilize to make clubs. Now, clubs are really easy to craft and they don't exactly increase the skill all that quickly, but you have to start somewhere, and I didn't want to use up all of our metallic resources. At least not before we collected more steel, that is. Then, late one rainy evening, Laz had finally arrived back home to drop off all the goods that he had purchased as well as some of the silver that he had made. And just so happened, he actually ended up purchasing a very unique and interesting weapon known as a steam-powered hammer. This hammer would significantly reduce his construction times, but it also has the same DPS as one of our katana. But of course, it's not near as effective as cutting through armor. Crushing heads, on the other hand, yeah. And it would seem to celebrate our first successful trading mission, Laz was throwing a party in our feasting hall for everyone. Looked like a bit of a snooze fest if you ask me, but they seemed to enjoy it, I guess. Then I damn near forgot to furnish our new residential housing, so we went ahead and done that with an end table, a dresser, and a bed for anyone that decided to stay there. It was also during this time that I moved Ori up to making some steel swords for us instead of the normal clubs, and he was doing quite well with it. The reason that I have moved him up, as I mentioned earlier, clubs are much easier to make, and thus they don't take near as long, and thus, because of that, the skill improves much slower. But we can't wait around on Ori all day, so while he's making new swords and increasing his skill, we were going to further improve our defenses by building more and more cannons, wooden embrasures, and some wooden shields to hide behind. When it was all said and done, we had 2 cannons per wall, one on the outside and one on the inside in case we have to retreat back inside. But another reason we're having to do this is because these cannons, of course, have a minimum range, so if enemies get too close, we won't be able to use them anymore. We would then end up having someone by the name of Harry contacting us from nearby, stating that some type of threat was following her, and if we allowed her to stay here and take on the threat for her, she would join us. Since we're desperate for new members, we would accept. And truth be told, I'm very glad that we did, because she had a really good construction skill and her social skill was off the damn damn charts. Now that she's one of us, we would allow her to go through our storage house and get some more appropriate attire like some wooden armor on, and then we immediately put her to work helping us haul some of our resources. Not long thereafter though, we would be alerted to the threat that was after her. It would seem that Harry had insulted one of the Neanderthal tribal leaders, and somehow those Neanderthals managed to get their hands on a toxic spewer that they were going to use on our area. A very particular situation indeed. Well, we wasted absolutely no time sending out Laz and the Rough to handle these filthy Neanderthals. These knot-headed fools, we almost felt bad for them to think that they thought it was a good idea to mess with us and one of the people that were joining us. That would be the biggest and last mistake that they would ever make. Using our ox cart, Laz would go through and trample them. And because they were too stupid to make any ranged weaponry, it was quite easy to kill them. It's a shocking miracle that they managed to figure out how to turn on the toxic spewer in the first place. My theory is that these fine folks in these cages were most likely operating the spewer and the Neanderthals just simply took over. As you can see, it looks like they left some of their articles of clothing behind. Either way though, even with an army of ox and muffalo, we wouldn't be able to move this spewer back to the base to properly utilize it, and I'd much rather have the components from it anyhow. In the nearby fields by the spewer, we also found some glowing flowers, which was very interesting. The Rough seems to think that they could be utilized in some sort of potion. Well, Laz is a man of science, but nevertheless he decided to collect them just in case they were useful. Now, as the two of them were on their way back at home, Black Toad tried to romance Harry by telling her a tale about hats. I know, he's a smooth operator, and by golly, he ended up getting the girl. It would now seem the two of them are indeed in love. By this point, Ori had made many a steel sword and finally increased his crafting level to a 6. Now, utilizing his artistic and crafting skills properly, he would be able to craft these rubies into the delicate lenses that we required. And finally, though it did take us a little bit of time utilizing these materials, he would be able to make our very first clockwork exoskeleton suit. And as you might have guessed, I ended up giving our very first one to Laz. And just in case you're playing along, I did have to use Character Editor to go about editing the apparel layers so that I could make sure he wore it over top of his armor, just in case you're curious. You could think of it as cheating, but I think of it as a necessary evil. Now, these exoskeletons, as you might imagine, offer a pretty minimal layer of protection in terms of combat, but they actually increase our movement speed by quite a bit and our carrying capacity by 20. And these are the lower level exoskeleton suits. Imagine what the steam-powered ones could do. Late one evening though, we ended up having someone by the name of Throb visiting the colony. He had a bulbous, misshapen, mutilated head. After confronting him, he would tell us a very sad tale about how he escaped a planetary cult here, and he also has some type of unique ability, but he promises not to kill us with it, which was good enough for me, so I let him join us. Now, it should be noted that his skill set was pretty lackluster other than his burning passion for mining and construction. However, his unique ability looked pretty interesting. Known only as Psychic Slaughter, we were unfamiliar with this ability, so we decided to test it out. A demonstration, my friend. Welcome aboard. Well, her skills are very useful, and you did indeed hear me correct. Her, I messed up earlier. She's a she and not a he, but can you blame me? It's a little bit hard to tell. She's, interesting looking. Now, after collecting a few more resources, we decided to have Ori here go ahead and make us a few more clockwork exoskeletons. We would end up giving these to the Rogue and Black Toad, who, if you ask me, are in desperate need of some brand new names, which we would promptly give to them. They will now be known as Kona, Yoshimaru, and Jiraiya, respectively. Of course, though, these excellent names come from our good friends in the comments section, Adam2275 and Marcus XJX Keats, so thank you both ever so much for the name suggestions. I love them. And now, of course, we do also need names for Throb, Harry, and Ori, so if you guys have any name suggestions for them, be sure to leave those in the comments section as well, and I'll pick and choose my favorites. Speaking of which, we would have Ori here go ahead and utilize some of the brass that we've been making to make some proper armor for Harry and Throb. Throb, our blind psychic swordsman here, would definitely need some proper proper protection during battle. Harry, on the other hand, is really only going to be wearing it so that she fits in with the culture and with the colony, but also in case she gets attacked and can't defend herself, which she's incapable of violence, so. Now, throughout this episode, I've actually been researching several different types of steampunk research technologies, and I just haven't mentioned every single one of them, but right now we're currently working on clockwork weapons, and we're going to be moving into clockwork turrets, which I felt was important to tell you. Now, even though turrets are going to be mighty useful for us, I wanted to continue improving the apparel and loadouts of our soldiers, and to go about doing so, we're going to need a tailoring building. This textile workshop would allow us to utilize our leathers and furs to go about making different types of clothing. Something in particular that we were interested in making was some backpacks for everyone. They offer some pretty minor protection with attacks from behind, but the most important thing about a backpack, of course, is how much it helps us carry, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, these increase our carrying capacity by about another 20 to 25. I apologize, I actually just double checked, and it would seem the backpacks increase our carrying capacity by an extra 50 kilograms, meaning that with the exoskeleton and a backpack, that's an extra 70 kilograms. Hopefully our backpacks will be useful against these raiders that are sneaking up against our colony in the dead of night. Ah yes, space mercenaries once more, it would seem. A bit frightening though, as some of them have some charged firearms as well as a charged bow. We would rush to our defenses so that we may defend our home, katana and cannon in hand. I'm afraid our cannon wasn't exactly the most accurate weapon in our arsenal though. I'm afraid our less advanced technology wouldn't fare too well against their charged weaponry. We would have to take cover as we were under some excruciatingly heavy firepower. Eventually, one of the Neo-Samurai would make her way inside our tower walls where they would attack our own. Thankfully though, Throb was here to save the day. Without their leader, the others were disorganized and fairly easy to take down. I was a bit worried about Laz at one point getting into a fight with Greyhound, but he too would fall to our might thanks to Ori. Unfortunately, we had killed all of the mercenaries, but we did end up getting their weapons, and I do say unfortunately simply because I had hoped to incapacitate them and take many of them as prisoners. But a brand new sword, rifle, and bow and arrow, all working off plasma tech, would be perfect for us. Laz got the bow as he has our best shooting skill out of everyone, and Ori got the sword because he has the best melee skill. It wasn't all good news though, I'm afraid. As I noticed Jiraiya laying in bed, I also noticed that his left hand had been cut off by the Neo-Samurai mercenary, completely cutting his manipulation in half. Now, we do currently have access to some pretty basic steampunk prosthetics, but they actually require a neural apparatus to be crafted, which requires specifically 6 in crafting for an intellectual and 4 in medical, which Ori doesn't have, unfortunately. So it'll be a hot minute before we can make a new hand. But in the meantime, there are a few other clockwork and steamwork creations that we can make utilizing our sapphire lenses. In particular, this little creation that we've made is known as an artificer's mask. It has absolutely no relation to his missing hand, but we would once again give this item to Jiraiya. Jiraiya, of course, is the colony researcher, and this mask will actually increase research speed by 10%. It would also increase our social impact by 10% as well, even though he doesn't really do any social interactions for us. It makes him research a bit faster though, and it looks pretty darn cool as well. Now, while we're still on the topic of our research building, I also decided to build a bookshelf, even though we don't currently have any books, some filing cabinets, and a nice plant pot, which should help him research faster as well. After that, I decided to put my focus into something of a butchering building. Normally, I keep my butchery as part of my dining room or great hall in this case, but I don't know, I wanted to try something a little bit different, so we ended up building an entire building for the butchering as well as some meat hooks for our animal carcasses. It is still within close proximity to our feasting hall though, and I also built some bridges across the pond for ease of access. A bit of time later, and I decided to upgrade our defenses once more this time around, with it taking out the wooden walls and replacing them with slate walls. Our defenses are always in need of a good upgrade, and you can never have too great of defenses. especially when we have mechanoid clusters randomly falling from the sky. Normally in a situation like this, I wouldn't even bother trying to fight the mechanoids, but this one in particular had a sun blocker which was going to kill out our crops, so we had to do something. Even though our cannons aren't exactly the most accurate, they do pack one hell of a punch, so we began using that against the sun blocker, which ended up waking up the mechanoids. Now that they're awake, we can give them one hell of a thrashing with our bows and our rifle. Well, assuming they don't pin us down with their lance, their shotguns, or their flamethrower. We would make a strategic retreat back towards our walls and defenses so that we may properly defend ourselves. Luckily, the mechanoids were so pissed off by this point they were willing to follow us. The last remaining mech was a big chungus with the needle rifle who we planned on jumping out on and beating him down with our katana, but luckily our spike traps ended up doing the job. Finally, we made our way back down to take out their last remaining inferno turret that was guarding the location, and once we had completed that, we would begin working on taking out the sun blocker as well. With it, as well as all the other mechs destroyed, everything was hunky-dory and we were safe and sound once more. Our beautiful village nestled in between the hills, no longer under the threat of a mech invasion. But before I go today, my friends, I want to share some wonderful ideas that you guys have provided for this series that we'll be sticking with. First up, we have a great suggestion from our friend C1Orn0N, whose suggestion here today is that every time Laz dies, we would add some type of scar to indicate how he died in a past life. I really like this suggestion. I think it's a lot better than my idea where we'd eventually end up as a torso with no eyes and no limbs or anything like that, and instead we'd just be a person with a shit ton of scars. I think that would be really fun, and it would also still add that little complex kind of issue where he's constantly aching from all of his scars as well. We also have a great suggestion from our friend the Itachi Killer, who was saying that his scars and whatnot should be the only things that carry over with him into a new life, and that he can barely remember his past lives. And to me that does make sense, because otherwise it would also feel like we should let him keep the research that he's completed in past lives as well. Otherwise, you know, how would he forget about it? And also I think him forgetting about his life would kind of single him as the main character, but also we could focus more on who the other characters are, like in each colony, which is kind of what I want from the series too, where we can mess around with different mod packs and mods and different characters. So I really like that idea. Remember though, my friends, if you have any ideas for the series, and especially any names for our characters, be sure to leave those in the comment section down below. I'm not going to be doing any lore or anything like that like we do with like the Eternal Winter series and stuff like that, at least not right now. I just kind of want to focus more on gameplay and a little bit less on lore as for now. If for some reason though, like in the next episode or any future episodes, you don't see me naming the characters or choosing from any ideas or anything like that, some of these may end up being pre-recorded and scheduled for in the future for you guys to enjoy while I work on some other projects to have uploaded for you guys. So, you know, don't be discouraged from providing names and ideas and stuff like that. I'll definitely get around to them. And, you know, I mean, if we end up dying and your ideas don't get used, I apologize in advance, but that shouldn't happen because I'm pretty good at the game, you know, unless Laz gets headshot or something somehow. But anyhow, I hope you've enjoyed. I love you guys. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.